Hello and welcome to the newest edition of the Signal Horizon podcast. Today it is with great pleasure, and I hope that I'm not going to butcher your name when I say, to welcome Zineb Riboua to our podcast. Zineb is a research fellow at the Hudson Institute. She's a prolific Substacker. She has written for the Wall Street Journal and other national and international media. We'll put links to her most recent articles and to her Substack in the description of this video. She especially also a couple of weeks ago has written a very interesting piece on what's now called third worldism, which was picked up by quite some prominent figures. It's definitely worthwhile to read, and we might have a conversation on this particular piece as well. But today I want to focus mainly on what's going on in Iran. What do we know? What don't we know? What's, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, are the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns? And Zineb, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Ralph. I'm an avid reader of whatever you write about the state of Europe, and really glad to talk about Iran today.
So tell us, it seems that I don't know how it is in the United States. In Europe, there's almost a little bit of a media silence. It's not, not a conspiracy or something, but it appears there is so little information coming out that parts of the media have almost stopped reporting on it. Now, is this a feature? Is it a bug? Do you think that this will be like it was during the Obama administration, that there was this boiling over of public anger and now it's receding again? Or do you think we are just at the beginning of what is potentially going to happen?
Yeah, so I think that there are two things happening at the same time. The first one, as you mentioned, yes, protests happened before, and people think that this is, what is new is old again, etc., etc. But I think that also, apart from being cautious, I think people are also quite, uncomfortable with what is happening, in the sense that there are a lot of diplomatic efforts to shield the Islamic Republic from what it's been doing. There was this elevation of diplomacy with Khamenei, that there is a deal that can be done with the Islamic Republic, and a lot of actually European diplomats and the establishment, I would say, in Europe really sees Europe having that sort of role to play when it comes to countering the Islamic Republic, but also managing it. That's, I think, the proper word. That it's basically a problem to manage and not a problem to solve.
Mm.
However, I think with this administration, I mean, in the first, of course, there was this discussion since Obama really about what to do with the Islamic Republic. And Obama's answer to that was, oh, let's do the JCPOA. We're sure they're going to comply, and that they will give up their nuclear ambitions, and that we can do business as usual, and we can ease the sanctions and make the Islamic Republic much more prosperous, and therefore they will hate us less. Obviously, it doesn't work that way. The Islamic Republic is first of all a revolutionary regime, which means that it needs Iran to sustain itself, and it sees Iran as basically a surrogate through which it promotes the revolution elsewhere, which is why Iran is in Syria. I mean, was in Syria, which is why the Islamic Republic has proxies across the Middle East. They are working in Iraq, in Yemen, etc., etc. And obviously it doesn't work because of the doctrine itself, but also it doesn't work because the Islamic Republic defines itself as an anti-Western republic. They genuinely believe that everything Western is basic, needs to be destroyed, replaced, which is why, for example, they are very attractive to the Chinese. But of course, whatever Obama was trying to do, it didn't work. And obviously, Trump put an end to all of that in the first Trump administration. There was maximum pressure campaign, making sure that the Islamic Republic does not take advantage of the financial markets, of the oil market, etc., to finance itself. And the maximum pressure campaign really worked. I mean, they stopped and they were extremely weakened when it comes to sustaining their proxies, and also the killing of Qasem Soleimani, who targeted Americans for a very long time under Trump. I think it was really the start of I think this Trump administration ambition to really weaken it. Obviously, the Biden administration, another pause, going back to Obama. They tried to do several tricks to get the Islamic Republic into a deal. The Islamic Republic, obviously, the tactic is extract as many concessions as possible, make sure the Americans get more and more afraid of you. And obviously, the Islamic Republic took advantage of Russia's invasion in Ukraine, and they were able to have these drone facilities with the Russians. They were also able to have a better relationship with the Chinese in terms of building up ballistic missiles and other areas. Obviously, now with the Trump administration back in power, and making sure that the sanctions are enforced. There were several sanctions, since last year, targeting the IRGC, targeting also a lot of the shadow banks and the shadow financial system that the Islamic Republic took advantage of, because some of what they were doing is that, there are sanctions in place, but hey, they can absolutely create an alternative channel through which they can do arrangements and sustain the IRGC and the proxies. And so they created these shadow channels and shell companies, and they collaborated with different banks. Some of them were some of them are in Turkey, some of them in the UAE, and others elsewhere. And the Treasury absolutely dismantled a lot of it, made sure that a lot of the international banks are complying. And there's also something else that happened that a lot of people just don't take into consideration for some reason. But this is why the protests that happened are not the same. Well, the Islamic Republic really maintained its ambition to get nuclear weapons, and they crossed that red line, which made them vulnerable in the sense that the Israelis, during the 12-day war, completely destroyed their chain of command. They went after the scientists. They went after a lot of the facilities, and they infiltrated them to the point where there were tensions between the elites in the Islamic Republic, and that means that there is a level of distrust in the Islamic Republic, because it's impossible to have those sort of operations without real human intelligence. And so it means that they're very, very vulnerable. So yeah, this is basically kind of a background as to why I think these protests are very different, and the state of affairs really, when it comes to the Islamic Republic, is very different.
So do you think that who is the opposition, or is there a unified opposition in Iran? That might be I put it wrongly. Or is there a chance for a unified opposition in Iran? That might be a better question. I think it's obvious there are protests in the street, dissatisfaction. You also mentioned the economic issues with the regime are probably pretty high, especially among the younger generation. But do you think that one of the problems that a potentially successful revolution could have is that there is no unified opposition, and that it could fracture if the regime applies ultimate pressure as it does, or extensive pressure as it does now?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question, in the sense that the Islamic Republic made sure that any opposition cannot really emerge. They are the opposition is very fragmented. Some of them are in exile, like the Shah, and some of them are operating within the realm of, we can accommodate the IRGC, etc. But I think it's one step ahead to think about the opposition. Mm-hmm. I think for an opposition really to emerge, the weakening of Khamenei himself and of key IRGC leaders needs to continue. And because they made several strategic errors when it comes to running a proper state, and taking advantage of that and making sure they get weaker and weaker and weaker to the point where they lose complete legitimacy within the elite. I think that's when you can see the factions and the real opposition emerging. I think we're not there yet, but I think that Washington is definitely thinking of that because of a lot of the red lines he crossed.
Would it be fair to say that the Iranian regime also in their foreign policy executed something akin to overstretch? Like they were active in the Gaza Strip, and they were active in Syria, and they supported Hezbollah. They had proxies in Latin America, that they were focusing so much on what's going on abroad, or they were focusing so much energy on their enemies, if you whatever they want to call it abroad, that they entirely neglected, or that they neglected too much what was actually going on domestically.
Yeah, it's absolutely correct. I wrote actually a piece on 7 strategic errors that Khamenei made, and I mentioned the proxies as you rightfully mentioned, because what they didn't, I think, understand is that proxies impose a governance cost at home. They definitely do. And so every resource, all the resources, they become diverted to sustain external actors at the expense of domestic investment, which is why they have water shortages. The electricity is not running on time. A lot of issues they have, inflation. So they're not simply taking care of their own population, and the state of Iran's middle class right now just speaks for itself. And so yes, and this is very much noticeable because after the fall of Assad, it became very clear that Syria played a very, very important role for the Islamic Republic because it's the key supply lines for them, and so they were very much incapable of adjusting their strategic posture. The losing Assad, also the death of Nasrallah, and losing a lot of Hezbollah's key assets. They realized, and I don't think they realized, but I think they are coming to the realization that they spent so much money on proxies that are now vanishing. And so obviously, I think it's one of the major problems that they are witnessing. The other part about this is that the way the Islamic Republic functions is that they obviously don't have a real army. They don't have a real defense system like any state. They rely on the proxies to scare away, Israelis, Americans. Oh, by the way, you should not touch us because if you do, we're going to escalate in a way you can't. You can't control, and the proxies are the ones who emphasize this capacity to escalate. But now there is a gap. It's all talk. They can't do much. Hezbollah, as we imagine it, doesn't exist anymore. They don't have Syria. They don't have access to Syria as they used to. Even in Yemen, apparently, I was reading a few people today. Even in Yemen, they have problems. Apparently, the Houthis think of themselves as alone. I mean, that just tells you the state of the proxies and how much Khamenei is making a bet that they can help him, but they obviously did not, and I don't think they can in the future.
Now, it appears, and correct me immediately if I'm wrong here, but it appears that both the Europeans and the United States, independently of who was the president, that there was always a certain degree of willingness to enter a deal with the Iranian regime. Now, I'm bringing this up because I'd be curious to hear your viewpoint on, in its self-perception, as far as you can talk about this. What does the Iranian regime see as its priority? What's important for them? I mean, are they ideological radicals? Is it pragmatic? Because I'm sometimes wondering, even when we look at the nuclear weapons issue, is that there would have been pathways, I guess, where they could have alleviated sanctions, what a deal could have been made. So what, when we look at somebody like Khamenei, what motivates such a person? Is it that we in the West simply cannot understand it because it's so different from how we view the world, or am I missing something?
Yeah, so I think that there's a kind of a mix of ideology, but also of strategy, in the sense that Khamenei, as a supreme leader, he has, the mission to spread the word, the message of the Islamic Republic revolution. It's part of the doctrine, really. I wrote something else about the theological roots of it all, but it's also available just on Wikipedia. But in Farsi, there's this doctrine of the guardianship of the jurist, Vilayat al-Faqih, and so they genuinely believe that political authority does not really come from public consent or whether Iranians adhere to it or not. It comes from this immense religious duty to rule in the absence of the hidden imam, and therefore whenever they remain in power, it means that this is a divine sign that they are going to survive. And so whenever they mess up a deal or they don't get what they want, they generally think, oh, this is just a temporary problem. This is just a disturbance. There's this concept called ibtila, which means that, this is not the end of it. This is just a test. And so whenever they fail at something, they think that this is just a divine test for them, that they don't have to correct themselves. They don't have to change how they think about things. They don't have to adjust, because if they keep up with the mission, they will be rewarded. And so there is this, there's this religious, theological understanding of things as well. That actually reinforces why Khamenei is, despite all of the opportunities, I'm like you. Sometimes I see things and I'm like, oh, you should just get the deal, and you survive as a regime. But they don't see it that way, and it's very interesting because for a long time the myth in Washington is that they are master chess players and that they know how to be real strategic players. But it seems that at the end of the day, every single positive outcome they got was because the West allowed it. And you can see that with the sanctions. I mean, the fact that IRGC was operating in Europe for decades is absolutely insane. It means that they had access to intel. They knew who the Iranian dissidents were. They were targeting people, making Europe much more vulnerable to any type of Russian aggression, etc. But so yes, I think that they're not. It turns out they're not as smart as we thought, but that the complicity and this willingness to help them out and push for openings is what maintained them alive for a very long time.
So it's not that they were particularly strategic or smart. It's just that the West, or at least parts of the West, were blind and I think one can say plain stupid.
I would say so. It's a very. I was very actually surprised by how even when there were the discussions about the European sanctions at the EU level, that were passed last week, there were still discussions about whether to do it or not.
Mm.
And it just tells you the state of how we've been thinking and how they have been thinking about the Islamic Republic, even though it's been kidnapping and taking a lot of European hostages.
Now, when we look at the structure of the Iranian regime, what you just also described, the ideological component, is that something that, again, this is always very difficult to say, of course, because we don't have a clear look, but in your estimate, kind of in your research, is this something that resonates also with the broader population, or is there a division between rural and urban, between old and young, between male and female, or is it primarily something that is beholden to the governing regime that, of course, has this strong religious component? And would it be fair to say that the country itself might actually be more or that there would be a tendency into a more secular direction. Or this is a, however we then define secular. The reason that there's a follow-up question to this as well, which is, do you think that the Shah would be the return of the Shah, or a new form of government that would include the Shah, that this is something realistic or within the realm of possibilities, or do you think that once again we're getting ahead of ourselves?
I mean, it's a possibility, right? I think we should be open to all sorts of scenarios, but what I can say on the structure of society itself and how they responded to the protests and etc. is that, so I was looking a lot at the economic indicators because they simply don't lie, and it seems that there's huge youth unemployment, and that a lot of the videos I've been watching and by talking to people, etc. The main I think the main fragment of the population that went to the protests were young people, and it's been the case since I think the Mahsa Amini protests, and it's a very good indicator because it just tells you how for an Islamic Republic that functions through the message and the revolution, it is struggling to recruit young people. And that tells you that there is a gap. And, from Soviet Union history and other things, there's one thing you can't do when you are a revolutionary is to let go of the youth. Because they're the ones who you have to recruit, you have to maintain, and and the Islamic Republic is doing a very bad job at it. And it's also because the Iranian youth is very connected. I mean, they have access to the internet and they see their neighbors. They see Azerbaijan, they see Saudis, they see Emiratis. They see how they are rich, they are prospering, they are opening up more and more to the West, and how they are in a country that is also rich in resources, has an amazing geographic location, and that is not running as a proper state. So of course, I think that creates a huge disparity, and it means that there is a generational problem that the Islamic Republic is not able to fix. The other thing is, obviously the Iranian society is very diverse, very, very diverse, ethnically, religiously. Even though the Ayatollah don't like this, don't like to promote that. I mean, and when they promote it, they promote it very selectively because the Islamic Republic needs to stay a revolutionary state against others, etc. But what that means is that when the protests happened, there were people from Baluchistan, Sistan, Baluchistan, and other provinces that were out, and they're usually actually pretty conservative, I would say, but they were out because they realized that they also are suffering as much as everyone else. When water doesn't reach you, it doesn't just reach you in Tehran. It doesn't reach you elsewhere. So there's this democratization of suffering that all Iranians are witnessing, and it makes sense why there's such a dissatisfaction with the Islamic Republic as such.
I mean, the dissatisfaction, as you said, is particularly expressed among young people, and I think you're absolutely right. For a revolution, it is important to capture that segment of the population. Another element, of course, would be, and I know this dovetails a little bit along the question I asked previously, is that every revolution, at least if we look at it historically, needs somewhat of a vanguard or a revolutionary elite, if you want. So dissatisfaction, going out in the streets to protest, all of that, sometimes it appears not in the case of Iran probably, but as we saw in other countries historically, it's one thing to overthrow or to cut out the knees under a regime, but then to replace it with something new, that very often seems to be the difficult thing. So is there also, when we compare it to previous demonstrations and expressions of dissatisfaction, do you think that something is potentially emerging? And of course, a question you don't have to answer, only if you choose to. Do you think that it would be not to recommend, but should it be considered that outside intervention might be part of regime change, or installing a new government, or whatever then ultimately the outcome would be? Or do you think it is something that ultimately this has to be done by the Iranians themselves?
I think I have more of a nuanced, I think, view on
Mm-hmm.
this. So because I see it as really Trump versus Khamenei. So when the protests happened, one of the first things that Trump said was, "Don't kill the protesters," and Khamenei did. And actually, Trump tried to give him, I guess, first, second chance. It was like, no, I did not killing them today. And then it turned out they did. And then the news would come out after Trump, oh no, they actually did. And then Khamenei posts things on X about how Trump is a fallen leader. He's comparing him to some others, and just making jokes and mocking him. And it seems that precisely because Khamenei crossed that red line, that something is going to happen that targets him directly from Washington. Why? Because Trump, this is not the first time that it happens. Trump had a similar thing with Maduro. Maduro was chanting and enjoying himself, saying "Come get me," playing John Lennon and dancing and mocking Trump. A few months later, he found out, and I think that they're thinking about something similar when it comes to Khamenei, because if you can see now, there's billions worth of military assets moving to the Middle East. Nothing happened yet, but it doesn't mean that nothing will happen. It means that there's a plan in place. And in the case of a regime change, I think that targeting Khamenei will impose a sort of regime change. How that will look like, I think that from a US point of view, I think they always prefer for things to go organically, and I'm taking Venezuela as a study case for this. They're making a transition and then see the elections and at least getting the political prisoners out, because you want basically someone who worked with Maduro, who has access to all the files to do that. So it seems that there's something that it can be a study case for that, but it also means that for the United States, I don't think they're thinking of this needs to be the perfect democratic state, etc. I think what they're more thinking of, as long as what emerges is not an anti-Western state, it's a state that can collaborate with its neighbors, that does not support terrorism across the board, that is not building ballistic missiles, that is not giving drones to the Russians. That is, I think, the ideal scenario. And that in itself is a lot of effort. So I think we have to wait and see what they will do in terms of targeting Khamenei. But I think that is a better template than thinking regime change as what happened in Iraq or Afghanistan. I would say.
So it's not. It's almost like as if a new model has emerged. What you just described, we can call it the Venezuela model, which is you don't necessarily have to replace the entire regime. It is enough to replace key people, key individuals within the regime that cause some foreign policy alignment, or of course also economic policy alignment with the new regime. But it's not necessarily or there's no longer any appetite, as you just mentioned with Afghanistan and Iraq, to say we need to implement democracy and human rights. It's a much more straightforward geostrategic, geopolitical approach. Would that be an accurate thing to say?
Yeah, especially because I think the Iranians themselves, I mean, they are very active. They have, I think, discussions. I mean, I believe there are thousands of people having the discussions, whether it's in Europe or the United States, and they will be the ones in charge about what to do next as well. But I think that yes, it's more of a transition, and then see what is going to happen next. I don't think it's going to be as abrupt and fast as we imagine regime changes to be. But because I saw Trump tweeting so much about how regime change in Iran, and they're not all bad and make Iran great again type of slogans, it just tells me that yeah, he's definitely thinking about replacing the leadership. The thing is about Trump is that for all of his faults, he's a very consistent person. I mean,
Mhm.
what he said in the 90s is exactly what he's doing today. How he's feeling about Iran 5 years ago is exactly how he's feeling about it today. And I think that they are definitely thinking about how to weaken the regime more and more. The list of sanctions really speaks for itself in that matter.
If I may invite you to speculate for a second, do you think during the 12th Day War, or even now, that if they would have chosen to do so, either the Israelis or the United States could have taken out Khamenei, and that it was a deliberate decision not to do it? Or do you think that this was never among the possible options?
I think it was among the options. The level of infiltration that Israelis had inside Iran was absolutely amazing. I mean, they knew exactly where everyone was. They knew exactly how leaders were moving. They targeted them one by one. I genuinely think that, and it's also been confirmed by a lot of reports that they knew where Khamenei was, and they decided to not take him. But that's a very important thing. It means that the whole deterrence posture of the Islamic Republic is basically non-existent, and that a lot of his credibility started vanishing after the death of the killing of Nasrallah, but also more and more now. Yeah, I think they made a decision to not to.
And do you think, could it also be among multiple reasons? Could one of them also have been that it is not clear to and this is interesting, as you said, if we see the level of domestic penetration that Israel was capable of, so yet it seems that even in Israel, they don't are not entirely sure what would happen if the regime would truly fall. You know, who would be the new people in charge? What would a new Iranian government truly look like? And it's a little bit of, and correct me immediately if I'm exaggerating here, but it's a little bit like the devil I know kind of approach, that we are not happy, things need to change. But if we can change them with some of the people who are currently in charge remaining in charge, we are happy to do it before we risk to be burned by yet another failed revolution or an unknown that would emerge.
I think that's a very good speculation, but I would put things into the context, because what the Israelis at the time were very concerned with is for Iran to have access to nuclear weapons and to really get ahead of that. And they exchanged a lot of, I think, messaging and signals to Trump, and they got a green light. And so the goal of the military operation was very precise, and it was to take down as much as possible, make sure they never have access to the program, and I think that that's why they made that decision to not go that far, because it means that the military operation will change, its nature will change, the goals will change, and so I think that this is why they made that choice.
I mean, it's interesting, as you just said, that what was the obsession of the Iranian regime, and I guess that there are probably some good points to be made with with nuclear weapons, or with the entire nuclear question. I mean, we have Saudi Arabia, like we have there's a couple of other, let's call it, theocratic regimes, and but it seems that it was Iran particularly who went all in on the on the nuclear issue. Why was that? Because it seemed to preclude many of potentially pragmatic, status quo arrangements with the West.
I think they saw what happened in Libya. The Islamic Republic really cares about regime survival. And I saw what happened to Gaddafi, and I think it also accelerated some of that. But they also genuinely also think that the North Koreans are geniuses, because they were able to stay alive and to operate for the longest. And so I think that this is basically why the Saudis and others, they also just genuinely do not want to have a revolutionary regime with nuclear weapons next to them. So obviously they'll go in to make sure they don't become targets, because Iran, through its proxies, have damaged a lot of Saudi facilities, oil facilities, through the Houthis. And so, yes, all of the region looks at that and says, yeah, we actually need them too if the Iranians want them. But I think that's really a question of regime survival. They want to stay as productive and efficient and as eternal as possible.
If in a hypothetical scenario, if you would be Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, and you have two choices or two potential choices, one is an Iranian revolution, at the end of which there might be another pro-Western government in Iran, and the other option is that the current regime remains in place, and even though you don't get along with them very well, there is a significant chance that despite them remaining in power, they will be significantly weakened. Now, if you would be, from a strategic perspective, if you would be Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates or other players in the region, Turkey, which one of those two options do you think that they would prefer? Or which one would you prefer if you would be in their shoes?
I think it would be the former. I know that there are a lot of analysts out there who say that, everyone in the region, they're not supporting the revolution because they want a weak Iran and etc. But I don't think that's really the reason. A lot of them are very concerned because they had to deal with Libya. They are dealing now with Sudan. They were dealing with Syria for a decade. That was absolutely horrible for everyone in the region. They don't want another intervention. Also, Iraq, they don't want another intervention that completely ruins the region, gives birth to other terrorist cells, and then they have to deal with it. They have to unravel their whole society to accommodate that. So I think it's a matter of thinking pragmatically about what the Americans can do, what the Israelis want to do, making sure that they get guarantees along the way that if an Iranian revolution takes place, their oil facilities don't get targeted. So I think that's more of like their thinking, because the at the end of the day, a more of a Western Iran is obviously good for all of them, because all of their security guarantees, they come from the United States, and having the United States as a mediator is better than going to China or to Russia to beg for help when it comes to tackling the proxies. And I think that this is basically how they've been thinking about it. And obviously there's always going to be a rhetoric, but the rhetoric usually does not, from what I can see, it's not matching the policy itself. A lot of them are now talking to Washington and making sure that they're included in the discussions. There was a Saudi defense minister here last week. The Israelis also are concerned. So I think that obviously Western Iran is a good is a good outcome, strategically speaking.
Do you think it's within the foreseeable future, it is a realistic outcome?
I think it depends really on what Trump will do. I think that's really what it comes all down to, on targeting Khamenei. But if because under Trump there will be more of a willingness to make sure that it happens, instead of letting it go organically. At least that's what I would say my assessment of it.
Before I let you go, where can people find your work? And if they want to check out your writings and your contributions to the public discourse.
Yeah, it's on zinebriboua.com, or on X, it's Z Riboua.
So I highly recommend to everybody watching. If you're not on Substack, get on Substack. I think it's really, I think, one of the fastest growing and most reliable platforms for good information, good commentary. If you're an ex, Zineb is definitely worth a follow. I would say even many of your colleagues at the Hudson Institute does some great work. Maybe just as a truly last question, how did that happen? What is I'm sure that many of our viewers would be curious, particularly our younger viewers. So how do you get into because you yourself, if I might say so, are still quite young. So how do you get into the American think tank environment?
Oh, I was very lucky. I came to Washington, and then I started studying at Georgetown University. That's how I met my professors, who were amazing. I learned a lot, and that's how I found out about Hudson Institute. And I applied at the time, and I really loved it since. And I wouldn't think of a better place to be.
All right, that sounds very good. Zineb, thank you so much. Looking
Thank
forward to
you all.
talking to you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You as well.